And we're starting off this list with 300 Kim Ma Street in Hanoi, Vietnam. This compound has sat abandoned for over 30 years, and it's said to be one of the most haunted houses in the entire city. There are all kinds of tales surrounding the place. People have claimed to see objects move on their own, semi-translucent or shadowy figures have been seen lurking about, and in the dead of night, ghostly screams are often heard from within the walls. This picture here has made the rounds for a while. As you can see, there's a man standing in front of the gate of the property, and in the background, you can clearly see what looks to be a ghostly figure in a white robe lurking behind him. Now, is this actually just a person who is very much alive, roaming through the abandoned property in a long white robe? At night, possibly, but there could also be a ghost afoot. Number 9, the Yongdok House in South Korea. If you ever find yourself in South Korea and feel like taking a spooky trip, you can visit this abandoned house. It's about a 3-hour high-speed train ride from Seoul, but you just might meet a ghost or 10, so maybe it's worth it for you. Plus, apparently you can just roam around for free. The Yongdok House is the final resting place of hundreds of soldiers. Around 700 of them died on this land during the Korean War, and of course their spirits are still said to haunt the property. As it turns out, the soldiers are all buried there. The home was built on a mass grave. Every owner who lived in the house experienced terrible misfortune. Not only did they encounter these tortured spirits, but they each met untimely deaths. Word got out about how seemingly cursed this home was, and nobody wanted to live there. It was eventually abandoned at some point in the 80s. Next up, we have the Edmonton Haunted House. Now, I'm not clear as to the name of the owner of this house or the exact location, only that it is or was in Edmonton. This is an old story dating back to 1909. The owner would rent the house out, but they had a hard time securing regular tenants, as each person who stayed there would rush out of the home, oftentimes in well under a month. An article at the time is quoted as saying, "From time to time, parties of different nationalities have approached the owner of the house and rented it, sometimes for a year, other times only for a few months. But generally, at the expiration of a few hours, they disappeared, bag and baggage, without even calling up the owner for a refund of the monies paid. The owner and his agent unaware of their departure until the next month's rent was due." Tenants would experience horrific paranormal activity in the home, with one story going that a tenant had locked himself in his room with furniture pressed up against the door, and yet somehow the door opened on its own, and from the dark hallway beyond, he heard a terrible disembodied groaning sound. Another story goes that an Asian businessman had rented out the home with 4 of his workers. They were planning to operate a laundry business from the home. They didn't even make it through the first night and fled from the home in the middle of the night, returning in the morning to collect their belongings. And at number 7, we have the Whaley House. Thomas Whaley began constructing this beautiful San Diego home in 1856, having proclaimed, "My new house, when completed, will be the handsomest, most comfortable and convenient place in town, or within 150 miles of here." It sounds like something Donald Trump would say. "My house is going to be the best place. We're 150 miles, but it's most comfortable. Everyone's gonna love it. It's gonna be the talk of the town." Anyway, for a long time, it actually was. It wasn't just the Whaley family home. It became the focal point of the entire town. There was a theater, a general store. It was the county courthouse. The San Diego County government rented out a portion of the home for its offices and records. There was a lot going on at this place, but the party started to end when the family began experiencing paranormal activity in the home. They would hear heavy footsteps making their way throughout the hallways at night, ghostly moans coming from throughout the house. They believed it was the spirit of a man named James Yankee Jim Robinson, who had been on the property after stealing a boat. Harsh time to live. Steal a boat, you deserve death, sir. Not long after these paranormal experiences began, one of the daughters, Violet, took her own life, and the Whaleys ended up leaving the home, building a new one downtown. Number 6. The Borley Rectory. Built in 1862 in Essex, this home was once known as the most haunted house in England. It served as a residence for the Reverend Henry Dawson Ellis Bull and his family. Reports of strange occurrences, including unexplained footsteps, mysterious lights, eerie sounds. It began being reported around 1900 when 4 of Henry's daughters claimed to have seen a ghostly nun in the yard. And instead of going inside like any rational person would do in that situation, they decided to run over and try to talk with her, but the nun started to vanish the closer they got, apparently. And the rectory gained widespread attention when paranormal investigator Harry Price conducted an investigation there in 1929. At this time, there was a different family living in the home who had also started experiencing paranormal activity, like servant bells ringing even though they had all been disconnected. Price's research led to claims of the Borley nun, a phantom coach, and other ghostly apparitions said to haunt the property. His findings were published in his book, The Most Haunted House in England, further fueling the rectory's haunted reputation, and the stories surrounding the Borley Rectory varied, with tales of tragic events such as a phantom nun and a supposed love affair ending in a unaliving. These stories added to the intrigue and really fed to this belief that this place was just a hotbed of paranormal activity. Number 5. The Figure. This next story was posted to Reddit by user u/Kim Jong Funk. It goes like this. When I was in elementary school, I shared a queen-size bed with my older sister and our family dog, a mutt that looked like a short-haired lassie. We'd sleep on the foot of our bed every night. When I was about 6 years old, I woke up one night around midnight and saw a dark figure standing at the foot of the bed. The figure was entirely in black without any eyes or a face. I tried to wake up my sister, but she rolled over to go back to sleep. My sister must have accidentally kicked the dog, because the dog woke up and raised her head and started growling at the figure at the foot of the bed. The growling then woke up my sister, and she saw the figure and started screaming. When my parents came into the room and turned the light on, nothing was there. To this day, both my sister and I are adamant that we saw a ghost or other demon on our room. We know we weren't crazy either because the dog saw it too. Next up, we have the Lalaurie Mansion. The Lalaurie Mansion in New Orleans has a notorious history dating back to the mid-1800s. Built by Dr. Louis Lalaurie, who lived there with his wife Delphine in 1832. The mansion's dark secrets became public knowledge around 1834. Reports of cruelty and mistreatment of slaves led to a pretty shocking discovery of a torture chamber in the attic, revealing the gruesome reality of their actions, especially on Delphine's part. She was a full-on sadistic, cruel, evil woman. It reminds me a lot of Elizabeth Bathory, but worse, and some of the things that went on here are unimaginable. She would like break her victims' bones repeatedly, just completely deforming them, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. They were complete monsters. Over the years, the mansion gained a reputation, of course, for being haunted, with claims of ghostly apparitions and eerie occurrences going on there. Local legends and ghost stories have attributed the haunting to the tormented spirits of the victims who suffered within its walls. Next on the list, we have the Sallie House. The Sallie House in Atchison, Kansas now stands completely abandoned due to its rather dark history. Several deaths are known to have taken place in the home, including the home's original owner, Michael Finney, Richard Edwin Finney, William True, Agnes Finney True, and a young girl named Sally, who had collapsed due to a severe abdominal pain. She was brought to the home by her mother so that the town doctor who lived there could tend to her. He determined that she had appendicitis and that there was no time to delay a surgery. He started the surgery before the anesthesia had fully taken effect, and Sally woke up on the operating table when she suddenly died, apparently from shock. Her spirit was said to linger within the home, and years later, 1993, a young couple moved in. They claimed that their dog would bark at random empty spots in the home, especially in the upstairs nursery. Soon the man would begin receiving scratches on his body from an unknown source. The room that was formerly used for operations would become cold at times, and objects would sometimes move on their own. Suffice to say, that couple didn't live there for long, and the home is now used for paranormal investigations, where paranormal occurrences are still reported on on to this day. Barry Pomeroy Castle, located in Devon, England. This place has a history dating back to the 15th century. It was originally built by the Pomeroy family, but later came under the ownership of the Seymours, a prominent noble family closely connected to the Tudor royalty. Over the years, the castle witnessed a series of renovations and expansions, but despite its impressive architecture and kind of picturesque setting, I mean, it's a castle, it looks beautiful, Barry Pomeroy Castle has also gained a reputation for being haunted, especially after having been abandoned in the late 17th century. Stories of supernatural occurrences and sightings have been reported on the property. One of the most famous tales involves the White Lady, believed to be the spirit of Margaret Pomeroy, who was allegedly imprisoned by her jealous sister and left to starve to death. Another ghostly figure is said to be the Blue Lady, and this one's really creepy though, because it's the soul of Eleanor Seymour, who reportedly fell to her death from the tower, and the Blue Lady is said to lure unsuspecting men to dangerous parts of the castle, especially the tower, where they'll fall to their death. Some claim to hear unexplained sounds and experience other strange phenomena. Tourists and visitors have reported feelings of unease and the sensation of being watched while exploring the ruins. And finally, we have the Amityville Horror House. Everyone has heard that name before. There have been tons of horror movies and books based on the goings-on in this house, and the tales surrounding it have become pretty famous in American folklore. For starters, 23-year-old Ron DeFeo Jr. had taken the lives of both his parents and his 4 siblings in the home as they slept. In 1975, the Lutz family purchased the home, but after just 28 days, they left, claiming to have experienced a string of paranormal occurrences. They said to have seen ooze sliding down their walls. There was a strange odor in the home, probably from the ooze. They'd hear doors slam on their own, as well as other objects moving, and they encountered swarms of flies right in the middle of winter. Even if there was no demonic spirit involved, yeah, I'd be out of that house with all that gross crap going on too.
Starting us off at number 10 is the Smurl family. Between the years of 1974 to 1989, the Smurl family was subjected to some incredibly terrifying hauntings in their Pennsylvania home. Over the 15 years they lived here, Jack and Janet Smurl, along with the rest of the family, reported that their TV once burst into flames, their toilets would flush themselves, and that various electronics would stop working for no reason all the time. But it was at night that the family got truly terrified. They would hear the loud footsteps despite there never being an intruder, and a nauseating smell always filled the house, but only ever at night. Soon enough, things got even scarier. They began finding what appeared to be claw marks all over the bathroom, and then in 1985, a full-bodied apparition began haunting the halls and hovering over them while they were sleeping. The family named her Old Hag, and it seems that after a while, the demon got bored of just watching the couple sleep, and so it began harassing them, and according to Janet, would routinely commit SA on both her and her husband. That was the final straw for the couple, and so they decided to bring in a priest to exorcise the demon out. But even after 50 exorcisms, the entity refused to tighten its grip on the house. So, fearing for their lives, the family finally moved out in 1989 and never looked back. Moving on to number 9, the Snekdar family. In the 1980s, the Snekdar family thought they had found the perfect home. But it wasn't until after they were all settled that they learned the house had operated as a mortuary for several decades since the 1920s. At first, everything seemed alright, but soon they discovered old equipment from the funeral home in their basement. This raised an eyebrow, but they brushed it off and didn't think much of it. That was until they uncovered that their backyard still contained many of the buried corpses, along with eerie photographs of the corpses hidden away in nooks and crannies. Soon they were being haunted by evil spirits, routinely hearing haunting noises, and even seeing full-bodied apparitions. The mother claims that when she would mop the basement, the water would turn red as if it were blood, or that she would catch objects flying around the room while lights would aggressively flicker. At that time, there were rumors circulating that the former funeral directors were guilty of necrophilia, which led to the house becoming haunted by an evil presence, seeking revenge on all that lived in the house. Moving on to number 8. The Cranmer family. Despite his wife's hesitance, Bob Cranmer was determined to buy his dream home and moved in with his family in 1988. However, it quickly became apparent they had moved into a house of horrors. Cranmer says that over the years he would watch helplessly as blood dripped from his walls and invisible hands assaulted him and his family, fearing each day that it might be his last. And finally, after 18 years, an exorcism in 2006 finally drove the demon away. But where did the haunting begin? Well, Cranmer believes it all started with Dr. James Mahan, a former tenant of the home. Dr. Mahan was an alcoholic who routinely performed illegal operations on women in his basement, but not because he was looking to help these women, because he had a deal with a demon. Cranmer says the demon who haunts the house is Moloch, a demon who feeds off of young sacrifices, and that Moloch had possessed Dr. Mahan in order to feed off his basement operations. Once Dr. Mahan died, there was no one left to please the demon, and so he tormented all the families who moved in after, hoping to be able to scare them into giving him what he wanted. Luckily, Mr. Cranmer was able to rid the house of Moloch, and his family escaped the torment. Moving on to number 7, Ghost. Next, we have a story that was actually posted to BuzzFeed, and I will just let them tell their terrifying experience. Quote, "When I was like 5 years old, my parents bought this huge house in a small town. We only lived in the house for 5 months before it unexpectedly burned down. When we first moved in, it was a 2-story creaky old house. I remember feeling uncomfortable there and didn't understand why. I always made sure to stay with someone, never alone. Around 2 weeks before it burned down, I saw a dark shadow walking through the hallway outside of my bedroom. Needless to say, I was terrified. After the house burned down, my stepdad still wanted to make use of the property, so he built a 1-story home. I still felt weird vibes from the new house, but it was not as intense as the old house was. One night when I was only 7 or 8 years old, I woke up, looked straight ahead, and saw a little boy wearing a white shirt with overalls. We made eye contact, and then he disappeared. Fast forward to 10 years later, my younger nephew was having problems sleeping. We all talked to him to figure out why he was reacting this way, and he explained that there was a little boy wearing a white shirt with overalls who kept bothering him and wanted to play. He even said the boy would pretend to shoot at him as if they were playing cops and robbers. In that moment, my blood ran cold. I had never told anyone about my experience." Next up at number 6, Tony and Deborah. In 1992, owners Tony and Deborah Pickman came forward saying that they began experiencing very strange things in their home after the birth of their daughter. What was once a completely normal home was suddenly infested by a demonic entity, covering the couple in scratch marks, cuts, and bruises nearly every day. On top of that, they were seeing full apparitions of the demons, objects floating around their house, and hearing strange demonic noises at all hours of the day. It got so bad they contacted investigators who attempted to reach the spirits and reason with them, but the investigators were also tormented by the entity. Eventually, they came to realize that Sally, the house's most active ghost, had died here when she was young from a botched appendectomy. Initially, they thought she was the demon, but they found out she had actually become a magnet for dark entities to pass through, almost like a portal for demons to enter their house. By 1994, they had enough and moved out of the horrible house, but have since maintained a website dedicated to their experience there. Moving on to number 5, LaToya Ammons. When LaToya Ammons moved into her quaint home in Gary, Indiana in 2011, she had no clue what was in store for her and her family. According to LaToya, things got bad quickly. The first troubling phenomenon occurred when a huge swarm of large black flies started circling the family's screened-in porch, and only seemed to be multiplying. These flies were relentless, even staying through the winter, and as soon as they arrived, so did the sound of strange footsteps at night. Then one day, LaToya saw a shadow figure walk across her living room, and she began to panic. specific. Something evil was in her home. It all came to a head after LaToya witnessed her unconscious 12-year-old levitating above her bed at 2 a.m., and so she contacted some clairvoyants to try and rid whatever evil spirit was living in her home. According to the paranormal experts, LaToya's home was haunted by an astonishing 200 demons and was indeed a very dangerous place for her and her family to be living. LaToya decided the best course of action was to undergo exorcisms to rid themselves of anything the demons could have placed on them and flee their home. All I can say is thank God they got out alive. Moving on to number 4. The cage. During the 16th century, this house was used to imprison 12 accused witches, one of whom was the famous Ursula Kemp, who was tragically executed for her so-called witchy ways. Whether that is all coincidence or not is up for debate, but according to the 2004 owner Vanessa Mitchell, it is a very haunted home filled with deep-seated evil. Vanessa claims the demons wasted no time introducing themselves. The first night she moved in, she saw a shadowy figure in the corner and knew right away that something was very wrong. Shortly after, she began to feel harassed by the entity, as it would push when she was home alone, smack her hard enough to leave bruises, and even shoved Vanessa down the stairs. Then she began seeing strange things too. Bloodstains started showing up on the floors all the time, and objects began launching themselves across the room. Whatever it was, it did not want her there. In an interview, she states that during her 3-year time living in the cage, she witnessed 4 ghosts, 2 men and 1 woman, which she claims she once captured on camera. Thankfully, she got out, but the house remains a notorious spot in Essex, frequented by paranormal enthusiasts hoping to catch a glimpse of the evil entity that nearly killed Vanessa. Moving on to number 3. The Armstrong Street House. In 1970, Anne and Roger Brock moved their family into a beautiful 4-bedroom house in Kokomo, Indiana. The family didn't have a ton of money, but they were able to score the house for pretty cheap, which in hindsight could have been a clue. Mere hours after the family moved in, they began to notice oddities like flickering lights, but brushed it off as nothing. Then one night, one of the daughters, Lana, was awoken by sudden shaking. She thought it was an earthquake at first, but then she looked out her window to see a strange man, drenched, staring at her through her bedroom window. Lana freaked out, but then in the blink of an eye, he disappeared. Another night, she heard a knock at her door, and assuming it was her parents, she went to answer it, only to have her mouth covered by an invisible hand. She tried to scream, but couldn't. Suddenly her dog appeared and distracted the entity, allowing Lana to scream for help, but this only angered the spirit. To get back at her, it picked up the dog and threw it out the window, sending it plunging to its death. This went on nearly every night. Years later, they learned that someone was killed in the house, which could explain their torment, but still, not a single member of the family has ever dared return. Coming in at number 2, the House of Death. Once the home of actress and poet Jan Bryant Bartell in the 60s, this house holds a reputation for housing some of the most demonic entities in all of New York City. Within weeks of moving in, Jan knew something was deeply wrong with the house. She would often feel the touch of an icy hand across the back of her neck or hear footsteps follow her around the empty house. The house always reeked like something was rotting or dying, and her dogs were always barking into nothingness. Then one day, one of her dogs died, as if out of nowhere. So she decided to take matters into her own hands and called a psychic medium. But this only angered the demons. During the first session, the medium went into an unusual trance, speaking about the hundreds of bodies buried underneath the house. And Jan knew it wasn't the medium speaking. It was then that she learned how many people had been killed or taken their own lives while living here. Then all of a sudden, the medium's eyes bulged out of her head and she started shouting that she would never leave in a deep demonic voice. The encounter was enough for Jan to leave and never return. But sadly, a few years later, she published a book about her life in the haunted house just weeks before she took her own life. And last up in our number 1 spot, Janine and AJ. Back in 2013, a couple named Janine and AJ moved into a quaint and sweet little house in Springfield, Springfield, Louisiana. The hauntings started off small, with their radio turning on all by itself or the lights flickering independently, but soon enough they overheard their son speak to who he described as an imaginary friend late at night, and they heard a strange voice threaten to begin hurting Janine. Before long, Janine was being harmed by the presence, waking up to find bruises and scratches, and would often get pushed around by the demon in the middle of the day. She began noticing that the rosaries she hung were spinning in the house, plaster was falling from the ceiling and missing her by mere inches, and soon she began to seriously fear for her life. One day her and her husband decided to leave out a tape recorder to see if they could get any proof of the demon occupying their house. And sure enough, when they went to check the recorder the next day, they captured growling sounds and the demon saying, "She will die." The last straw was when they moved a rug in one of the rooms, only to discover that the floor had been covered entirely in satanic symbols. Needless to say, they packed up everything and got the hell out of there.
Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have the Ramsey home. Okay, so what would you say if someone told you that they bought the home where a horrific and one of the most prolific crimes of all time happened? And then what if I told you that they went to sell it years later but decided against it because they just loved the home so much? I mean, I get it, but I don't. You know? This is what happened when Timothy and Carol Scholler Milner bought the JonBenet Ramsey home in 2004 after it had sat vacant since the terrible crime happened in 1996. The 7,000 square foot home was built in 1926, and after their 2004 purchase, the couple tried listing and selling the home at a price point of $2.3 million in 2008, 2009, and again in 2011, and once again in 2014, but at a lower price of $1.95 million. But surprisingly, no one wanted to buy it. I wonder why. Now the home is unavailable for purchase, but not because it was snatched up by someone, but because Carol and Timothy turned down all of the offers because they just love the house so much.
Number 9. The Amityville Horror House. Now, I understand that when you found your dream home, absolutely nothing could change your mind. But if someone had ended their entire family's lives in it about a year before they'd moved in, I'd probably have some serious reservations. Well, that's the DeFeo house. More famously known for serving as the backdrop to the real-life case for the Amityville Horror series of movies after a brutal slaying from Ronald DeFeo. The family that moved in, the Lutz family, believed that they were getting such a good deal for their new home that they were not going to be deterred solely because one of America's grisliest crimes had occurred in it. They paid $80,000 for a 4,000 square foot house, and you know what, gotta be honest, with those savings, I'll let the ghost eat dinner with me. Unfortunately for the Lutz family, the house ended up being more than they could bear, and after only a month of living there, they moved out after reporting a number of hauntings, from green slime running down the walls to spectral apparitions, and being rudely awoken every night at 3:15, the exact time the original family died. It eventually got to be too much for the Lutzes, who moved out.
In our number 8 spot today, we have Raynham Hall. Raynham Hall is located in England, and it was built around 1620, and it is a large building on 7,000 acres, which is obviously quite impressive. The tale that follows this haunted building is that of Lady Dorothy, or Dolly Townsend, and her husband Viscount Turnip Townsend. I can't believe a couple with the nicknames Dolly and Turnip have an evil history, but unfortunately they do. The story goes that Turnip kept Dolly locked up in the house, which is obviously just terrible and very cruel. After her passing, it's no wonder she decided to stick around and haunt this house. Apparently there was a photo taken of her ghost in 1930, and it is said that no one has ever been able to prove it was fake, so all you photo experts out there, take a look and let me know what you think. Despite these haunting tales, however, it is said that the Raynham family still chooses to reside here.
Number 7. The Ackley House. Now, who's to say that all ghosts have to be pestering little poltergeists? According to the matriarch of the Ackley family, one Helen Ackley, the ghosts who live with her at the Ackley house in New York have been nothing but friendly to her. It all started when her husband, George Ackley, saw what he described as a pair of disembodied moccasins walking across the floor. Then, the daughter complained that there was something that would shake her bed at night, every night, until one day she just asked it politely to stop, and then it did. Who knew if you just talk to the ghosts and just sit down and hash out their problems, you can come to a mutual understanding? From here, the Ackleys reported living friendly with their new roommates. Interestingly, the Ackley house led to the naming of one of the funniest named cases in legal history, the Ghostbusters ruling. Although the Ackleys were aware that the house was haunted when they bought it, and they liked it, when they sold the house, they did not mention the paranormal elements to the new buyers, who claimed they would not have bought it had they known. Meaning the new family were allowed to pull out, but only if they told the judge that they ain't afraid of no ghost.
In our number 6 spot today, we have the Conjuring House. For this one, we are taking a look at the home that was the background for one of the most famous Ed and Lorraine Warren cases of all time, as well as the setting for the first Conjuring movie. This house, which was built in 1736, wasn't anything special and didn't really gain its fame until the family of Roger and Carolyn Perron moved in 1971. They claimed to experience terrible things like the smell of rotting flesh, witnessing something levitating in their beds as they slept, and one of the family members even claimed to have been possessed by a spirit. The family of course called Ed and Lorraine to come and investigate and hopefully help them out. Once there, the pair claimed that there was in fact a spirit haunting the home, and it was that of Bathsheba Sherman, who was said to have been a witch who previously lived in the house and who was buried in the cemetery nearby. The story was sensational, and despite its modern fame thanks to the movie franchise, in 2019 Corey and Jennifer Heinzen still decided to buy it and open its doors to paranormal investigators from all over the world. As of this year, however, rumor has it that the estate has a new owner, a Boston developer with a deep belief in the paranormal by the name of Jacqueline Nunez. It is reported that she was prepared to go to great lengths to get the home as well, as it is claimed that she paid around $1.525 million for the haunted house, which is about 27% higher than the asking price of $1.2 million.
Number 5. The Los Feliz Mansion. The Los Feliz Mansion was the happy home of one Dr. Harold Perelson and his family. A picturesque old house in the heart of LA. At least it was, until one night, something changed in Perelson, and he saw fit to try and slay his whole family with a ball-peen hammer. Normal doctor stuff. Tragically, he fatally struck his wife, but luckily his children managed to escape. He himself chose to drink acid instead of facing the police, leaving behind on the bedside table a haunting excerpt from Dante Alighieri's Divine Comedy. It's said that the spirits of the late doctor and his wife were still trapped inside the house, unable to leave from their violent final resting place. 2 years later, the house was purchased by the Enriquez family, who knew all about what had transpired earlier and was interested in the property, but not as a home, electing it to use it solely as a storage unit instead. It makes sense. Ghosts never possess inanimate old scary objects when they're left to their own devices. Never. They continued to use it as a storage facility no problem, but come 2016, the house was put up for market again, and suddenly no one was interested whatsoever. The Enriquez family could not find a buyer. The Enriquez family offered this piece of advice for anyone who wanted to buy the haunted house looking for a good deal. Just say a prayer every morning and every night. Maybe get some other stuff too, maybe a ring of salt, maybe a rosary, I don't know.
In our number 4 spot today, we have the Sally House. The Sally House is a haunted house that is located in Atchison, Kansas. The house was built in the mid-1800s, but its haunting history started when a doctor purchased the home. The doctor had his office in the front room of the home, and he lived upstairs with his family. One day, a mother brought her daughter named Sally to the doctor, and it was there that she was diagnosed with appendicitis. The doctor claimed that there was no time to wait and began performing surgery on her right then and there, even before the sedation had set in. Sally ended up passing away, which is obviously very terrible and sad, but despite these stories of the home's history, it didn't stop renters Tony and Deborah Pickman from residing in this home in the mid-1990s. After they began living here, the story of this haunting gained a lot more attention, however, because they began experiencing some really strange occurrences. These occurrences ranged from strange voices to clear burnt finger marks on candles that had been mysteriously lit, all the way to actual attacks made on Tony. This led to extensive investigations being done by a Kansas paranormal group who found that Sally was haunting the house, but surprisingly she wasn't the only one. There was another spirit of a middle-aged woman who was apparently the one who was behind the more aggressive and frightening attacks. Now the house is open for self-guided tours as well as special overnight visits for those who dare.
Number 3. The White House. Yeah, you heard me right. And don't worry, I'm not going for any sort of political metaphors here. I'm not smart enough for that kind of commentary. I fell off way too many razor scooters as a kid. The White House has been home to a lot more than the seat of the American government, as it's home to a number of ghost sightings, including the ghost of the great emancipator himself, Abraham Lincoln, as well as his son, Willie Lincoln. Several presidents over the years have reported seeing strange and unusual sightings around 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. A White House spokesman said he definitely believes in ghosts because if he didn't, he would be calling 8 presidents a liar. The first president to ever report a ghost sighting was Lincoln himself, who said he would see his late son Willie at the foot of the bed, something his wife would also corroborate. After his assassination, political leaders all over would report seeing Lincoln at times of great need in the country. Churchill claims he once stepped out of the bath, embarrassed to see Lincoln standing in front of him. Abe is one of the most reported ghosts the visitors claim to see at the White House. Reagan once claimed that his dogs would follow him in every single room of the White House, but refused to go inside Lincoln's old bedroom, and would instead just bark at the door.
In our number 2 spot today, we have the Dahmer home. Jeffrey Dahmer is of course one of the most terrifying and prolific serial killers ever, which is exactly why it doesn't come as a surprise that his home, the one where some of his very first crimes were carried out, was a bit of a tough sell. Yeah. Turns out most people don't want it. How strange. PETA, of all companies, was going to use the property to convert it into a vegan restaurant, but because of zoning issues that never happened, so they needed to look for someone else to purchase the property instead, and that ended up being Chris Butler, the rock musician from Waitresses. According to Chris, when he first viewed the home, he had no idea the dark history behind it. He was really intrigued in it because it is surrounded by woods, and as a rock musician, looking for somewhere you can make as much noise as you want without bothering anybody is ideal. When you think of a serial killer owning it prior, that thought immediately gives you chills. In the end, he says he went with the house because he really liked it, and it's not like it's the house's fault for the atrocities Jeffrey committed, which, I mean, is fair. He also doesn't believe in ghosts, so he doesn't worry on that front. According to him, the only thing he really worries about in the home is all the people stopping by who want a tour, like they're entitled to it.
And coming in at the number 1 spot is the LaLaurie Mansion. 1140 Royal Street in New Orleans looks gorgeous on the outside, but on the inside is home to a storied history of horror. The house was first sold in 1838 to a seemingly well-meaning couple, one Dr. Leonard Louis Nicholas LaLaurie and his wife Delphine LaLaurie. Seemingly well-meaning being the key term here. For starters, they were slave owners, and Delphine treated them horrifyingly. She would put them through all kinds of physical torment. 2 of the people she had enslaved jumped to their death rather than ever have to face any more of her. In the attic above the kitchen, she kept people chained up, bodies broken, eyes gouged out, kept alive solely for the purpose of inflicting as much cruelty as humanly possible. Delphine fled the mansion behind, and the house laid in a state of ruin and disarray for years, eventually finding its way into the hands of a national treasure hunter, one Nicolas Cage. Yep. That one, like the guy from Face Off. Cage said, "I bought it in 2007 because I figured it'd be a good place to write the great American horror novel. I didn't get too far with that one." It was said that the house had been haunted with such violent energy still residing in its walls. Only a guy like the Ghost Rider 2 star Nick Cage would see that and think it sounds inviting. Wild at Heart star Mr. Cage only stayed there for a few years, eventually moving on from the LaLaurie Mansion in 2009, leaving it behind where it now operates as a tourist destination. And no word if he's made any more progress on that great American horror novel or not.
Starting us off at number 10 is The Repeat. This one was shared by Reddit user I Am Here to Say This, who said they lived in an old home for 5 years. The user's stepdad had known the man who lived in the house before them, and also that he had hung himself in the attic. Not really thinking anything of the story, the user just continued on life as usual. But 1 month into living at the house, he started hearing footsteps in the attic. And it wasn't just once. Like clockwork, every night at 3 AM he would hear footsteps pacing around in the attic. The steps were at a normal speed, but they were heavy. It kind of sounded like a man was thinking about something. After the footsteps, the user would hear a chair falling on the ground and then absolutely nothing. And I feel like a lot of the time when people themselves, they use a chair to stand on and then tie themselves to whatever they need to above and then knock the chair out of reach. So I don't want to say the ghost of this man was redoing his suicide every night, but I'm also not saying that. And I haven't had breakfast and I woke up late. Coming in at number 9 are the Doppelgangers Part 1. This one's from Reddit user 1LT Obvious, who is sure his family home was haunted by doppelgangers, and here's why. He recalled one time as a teenager when he was on MSN with his girlfriend with the webcam on. Do you guys remember the days when you'd like nudge people and play games on MSN? Either way, in the view you could see the user, his bedroom door behind him, the stairs going upstairs on the left, and the living room on the right. Now usually his little sister would fall asleep watching TV and then go to bed at some point in the night. At one point while they were messaging, the user saw his sister leave the living room to go upstairs, but she didn't make any sound, which he found really odd. They lived in an old house, so it would creak really loudly every time anyone went anywhere. He went to the living room to check, and his sister was there still sleeping, so alarm bells started going off. He then goes and sits back down and asks his girlfriend if she saw anything on the camera, and she was like, yeah, I saw your sister go upstairs. But my sister's sleeping on the couch, so who the hell just went upstairs? Do you guys see why I'm always on high alert? What is going on? At number 8, we have the Doppelgangers Part 2. From the same user, he shared another story involving his own ghostly doppelganger. There was one afternoon where his whole family was getting ready to go somewhere, and he was already sitting in the car with his mom. They were waiting for his little sister, and when she finally got into the car, she looked at him and was like, what the hell? Confused, the user asked her what was wrong, and she replied saying she thought he was still inside, because before she left, she yelled saying we're leaving, and she got a reply from him upstairs saying, okay, I'll be down in a minute. When really, he was in the car the whole time. No one else was in the house, yet his voice answered her. Nervous laughter. Moving house. Lol. Filling at number 7 slot is The Shadow. Now this one comes from Cotton Candy Sweet and Low, who was sure that he had a ghost living in his last house. There were just too many things that took place that couldn't be explained. Full coffee cans would be flung across the kitchen. His mum woke up in the middle of the night because she felt something pulling and pinching her legs. One night the user woke up because some force kept shaking his bed, and then he started hysterically crying till it stopped. But the worst thing he described took place one night at 3 AM. He was downstairs and he saw a shadow on the wall, assuming it was his mum, but when he turned around, no one was there. Then all of a sudden he felt this intense choking feeling and the light started flickering before going off completely. Meanwhile, this guy is getting choked by something and cannot breathe. When the entity finally let him go, he ran to his mum's room and cried under the blankets all night. I would do the same, honestly. I would do the same. Now at number 6 is The Maid. This one comes from Reddit user Twig Snapper, whose uncle's house is located in very East New York. It was supposedly haunted because the family that owned it in the 1800s refused to give it to their stableman and decided to sell it instead. Sad and disappointed, the stableman's spirit stayed at the house, as did the maids. Now the family used to hear furniture being moved around at night, but just chalked it up to how old the house was. Naive. Simply naive. However, one weekend the uncle had a friend and her sister stay over, and waking up from mid-sleep that night, the friend saw the maid bringing towels down the stairs. Now she never saw her go back up, but a few minutes later she saw the maid bring a percolator downstairs as well. Not thinking much of it, and if anything impressed by the hired staff, she went back to sleep. When she woke up and went downstairs, she asked the uncle where the maid went, and the uncle was like, what? I don't have a maid. He then asked her what she looked like and then took her to an old portrait in the living room which was of the maid. The friend then said that was the woman she saw, and he replied saying she had been dead for over a century. But the grind never ends, does it? Coming in at number 5 is The Cat Hater. You already know I have beef with this one. As a cat lady, this one is just simply not on. Now this one was shared by Reddit user MT Swagger, who said there was some sort of entity in his house that either hated his cats or just liked to tease them. He recalled watching one of his cats walking through the dining area, but then all of a sudden her tail went straight and she was sliding backwards like she was being pulled. The cat was freaking out and meowing and actively trying to run, but she couldn't move. The entity held on for a few more seconds before letting the cat go. You cannot grab an animal by its tail and pull it. It hurts them. You guys, it hurts them. I may not be able to see this ghost entity, but I will call the police on them. I don't even care. At number 4 is The Door That Never Closed. So this one was shared by Redditor iCountFish, who said he used to house sit at his boss's house whenever he was out of the country. Now this house was a massive, I'm talking 6 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, the whole 9 yards. The user kind of exclusively lived on the first floor, but a month in he started hearing bumps and bangs coming from the second floor. He'd go up to check but would never really find anything. And the thing about the second floor was that there were a lot of unfinished areas, one of which was a walk-in closet that was attached to the unlit garage attic. I didn't know you could have a garage in the attic. Either way, one day he went inside to investigate and then locked the door as he left. 2 nights later he heard more noises and went up to check to find the door open. Not just unlocked, but open. And this continued to happen. The door would not stay shut or locked no matter what. At one point he even locked it and pushed a bed up against it to find the door unlocked yet again, and the bed moved. Like, I knew ghosts could move smaller things, but a bed? Damn. Zam, Zaddy. Filling at number 3 slot is the College Nightmare Part 1. So this one's from Munchies on Reddit, who said he lived in a haunted house with his friends while he was in college. He had so many stories to share, but I tried picking the best ones. One night he woke up at 3 AM fuming because his roommate's door kept opening and slamming shut. He shouted from his bed telling his roommate to stop before realizing he was the only person in the house that weekend. But as soon as he finished yelling, the doors stopped moving as well. Instead, the hippie beads hanging on his own door started swaying violently against his door for an hour before stopping. He also shared that anytime anything strange happened around the house, it would start smelling like this strong, flowery old lady sort of perfume. So I'm guessing the entity haunting them was an old woman from the days of yore. What does that even mean? The days of yore. I don't know, I heard it. I used it. Now at number 2 is the College Nightmare Part 2. Now another really odd thing with this college house was the fact that it had a door built into the floor that led to the basement, but it was always hidden by carpet, so no one else other than the tenants knew it was there. However, things in the house would continuously go missing and wind up in the basement in the coal chute down there. On another occasion, one of the roommates was playing video games at night when he saw a visible cloud of mist travel from the kitchen into the bathroom, then disappear into the basement door. Another night, the last roommate up was locking the doors and closing the lights before going to bed. As he was walking, he heard someone breathe into his ear, and initially he thought it was one of the roommates, but they were all asleep. He turned around, saw no one there, shat himself, and then ran to his room. And finally, at number 1 is the previous owner. This one comes from the Toenail Collector on Reddit, and I honestly hope you do not collect your toenails. I'm gagging. Either way, he shared that as a teen he lived in an old farmhouse that his family were remodeling. One day he was working under his truck while only being supported by a jack, which I feel like is pretty dumb. Either way, midway he really had no reason to get out from underneath, but all of a sudden he felt this overwhelming urge to get out. So he did, and less than 2 seconds later the jack slipped and the truck fell to the ground. Now had he been under there, he would have straight up died. So he ended up telling his parents about it later on that day, and his mum started sobbing, saying the previous owner had died under a vehicle in the exact same spot. The family would also see moving shadows around the house and music coming from upstairs despite no one playing it. One morning his mum was making breakfast and she went to get something from a cabinet, and when she turned around all the forks were stabbed into the table and then bent like right angles. Like, to know what's going on there. Are we just gonna sweep it under the rug? Okay, I guess so.
Getting us scared in at number 10 is John Soden and his house in Los Angeles. It's time to brace yourselves because this story is pretty dark. Back on January 15th in 1947, a woman's body was found on this lot. Her murder became one of the most reported murders of the time because of the gruesome way in which her body had been found. She was surgically cut in half from the waist down, washed, cleaned, and posed by her killer. Residents who have since lived there have reported hearing strange noises, such as the dragging of heavy chains, heavy footsteps, and voices calling their name. It's actually a really nice looking house, but it is full of negative energy, and it is also believed that anyone who steps foot in this house will be cursed. So, you know what? I'm good at just admiring the architecture from like Google Maps. I don't even have to see it in real life. The Queen Mary ship creeps onto this list at number 9. I had to include this one on this list because people technically did live on this ship, and it is referred to as one of the most haunted ships in America. It was operated since the 1930s, but now it is permanently docked in Long Beach, California, and it is used as a hotel. As nice as this might sound, while guests on board will often experience sleepless nights, there have been a bunch of scary paranormal activities reported on this ship. Guests will say that they will hear creepy kid laughter in the middle of the night, or things will be flown across the room. And room B340 has been taken out of rotation after there's been numerous violent poltergeist activities. It's actually impossible to keep someone in that room for the entire night because they will just get scared away. For me, I would probably last a minute. Probably not even that long. Up next, number 8, we have the Stanley Warehouse. This is a notorious haunted house that has a long reputation of being one of the most haunted places in Orange County. One of the most talked about frightening ghosts that live here is the previous owner. During her golden years, she was unable to climb up the stairs, so after her death, she is known to appear in spirit on the staircase, blocking others from going up. Visitors have reported that they found it difficult or even impossible to get past her and go up the stairs. Oh, and let's not forget about the spirit of an old man who you can hear whispering nasty and offensive things while you sleep. And if you visit the house, you will be able to hear a baby crying upstairs, but when you go into the nursery, no one is there. That would freak me out. I think I would want to visit this house just to see if I can make it upstairs, but you'll never convince me to sleep there. I mean, I just value my life way too much, and I gotta find out what happens next on Bachelor in Paradise. Moving into number 7, we have the Battery Point Lighthouse. This is an iconic lighthouse located in Crescent City, California, and it was built back in 1856. There has been numerous reports of strange and creepy occurrences happening there. Lighthouse workers and guests say that they have heard what sounded like someone wearing large boots stomping around. There have also been reports of items moving, cold spots, and the feeling that someone was touching them when no one was even there. Apparently there are 3 ghosts that haunt this lighthouse, because one just isn't enough. No one seems to know who they are or why they are haunting this place. All I know for sure is that we should just board up the place and just leave it alone, just forget about it. Every now and again a visitor will feel someone tapping on their shoulder, or furniture will move by itself. I mean, that is definitely not okay, and definitely you don't want to be there on a stormy night. Bad things are said to happen there when it rains. The Whaley House haunts us in at number 6. This house was built on an old site where the public executions used to occur. So yeah, I would say this place is pretty damn haunted. Over the years, many descendants of the Whaley family lived and died in that house, and when the house was being restored, workers and visitors began to notice strange and mysterious sounds, sightings, smells, and encounters. A lot of people reported hearing scary noises and loud footsteps that left footprints. You can actually visit this house and take a tour, but I'd rather not. I'd rather spend my time at Disneyland, where I know it's 100% safe and not too scary, or is it? This place is littered with scary ghosts, and a lot of unsettling things have happened there. I'm getting the chills just thinking about it, so I gotta move on. Let's move on, let's see what we have next. Well, you know what? The Red House jumps into number 5 next on our list. This is an old abandoned house that is occupied by a vengeful spirit. Back in the beginning of the 20th century, an engaged couple used to live here. Well, on the night before their wedding, they had a huge fight, and the man pushed his fiancée down the stairs. She died, and he buried her in the backyard. Well, today, she has been seen haunting the house and nearby businesses. People have reported that she is wearing her wedding dress that is covered in blood. Is it her own blood? And local legends say that if you step in front of her, she'll rush forward and drag you to her gravesite, and you will never be seen again. Okay, I don't think I'm gonna be visiting this creepy thing anytime soon, or any of these haunted houses on this list. I'm just not brave enough. Like I told you, I hear wind and I run. I see something just a bit bigger than a chihuahua and I run. Okay, the Glen Tavern Inn creeps us in at number 4. This house was built in 1911, but don't be fooled by its beautiful exterior. This house has a very ugly past. Back during the Prohibition, they converted the 3rd floor into a speakeasy, brothel, and gambling den. And one of the most infamous rooms is room 307, which is said to be haunted by 2 ghosts. The amount of paranormal activity here is very high. Visitors said that they saw children running through the halls, and some say that they've seen an angry man and a one-eyed female. There are also reports of the spirits playing the piano in the middle of the night, and others have said that their stuff was stolen. There have also been a lot of deaths that have occurred in this room. A cowboy was shot to death, and a woman was beheaded and left in a closet. Number 2, we have the Winchester Mystery House in San Jose. Since it was built in 1884, the mansion is said to be haunted by ghosts who were killed with Winchester rifles. Construction began in 1884 and never stopped until the owner died in 1992. The owner believed that her house was haunted by victims, and the only way to keep them quiet was to keep on building. The building was opened by the public in 1923, and the staff and the visitors have reported seeing mischievous spirits who liked to torment them. So yeah, don't be fooled by this beautiful house, because it is actually full of ugly surprises and scary ghosts lurking in every corner. But for those of you guys who are either brave or really naive, well, you can actually take a tour there and see all of the ghosts and scary paranormal activities for yourself. Alcatraz tops this list at number 1. Prisons are often the site of restless spirits and hauntings, and Alcatraz is no exception to that. This prison was the site of violent activities, and it housed some of the most dangerous criminals in the world. Alcatraz is actually a breeding ground for the paranormal. One of the most feared presence on the island is known as the Thing. This creepy spirit has red glowing eyes, and it has been recently seen by visitors and also by the prison staff when Alcatraz was in operation. Other common reportings are of creepy voices, sobbing, screaming, and the banging of cell doors. Some have even said that they felt as if they were being touched, felt cold, and they even had an emotional outburst of either sadness or anger just out of nowhere.
Number 10. Molly Brown House. Molly Brown was known for being an explorer and adventurer, and her adventure led her to end up as a passenger on the Titanic. She was one of only a small number who managed to escape the tragedy alive, getting away on lifeboat number 6. She was known as the heroine of the Titanic, as she tried to get their lifeboat to turn back and find more survivors, and even got the first-class passengers to donate money to the less fortunate who had lost everything in the event. She then returned to her home in Denver, where she lived for years until she finally passed away in 1932. Brown and her separated husband and mother apparently still remain in the home, haunting it to this day. Visitors say that they can often see the figures of the three in various different rooms throughout the house. Furniture will be moved and rearranged, and this most commonly occurs in the room that used to be their daughter's. The house now serves as a museum, and if you're interested, you can visit it to this day. Number 9. Woodburn Mansion. The Woodburn Mansion is located in Dover, Delaware, and was built back in 1790. It is often known for its purchasing in 1965 to be the residence of the governor, but others know it for its history of ghostly appearances. The first ghost was sighted in the home around 25 years after it was built. The two owners at the time were entertaining a preacher, and when they sat down for dinner, he asked if they shouldn't be waiting for the other guests before they start their meal, but the owners explained that there was no other guest. But the preacher described a man he had seen in the home that matched the exact description of one of the owner's fathers. The ghost of her father had also been seen by other guests over the years. People now say that the ghost of a little girl will also often appear, and if you leave out a glass of wine, it will be drank by the spirits of Revolutionary soldiers. Number 8. Bell Witch Farm. The Bell Witch is known for being one of the most well-documented supernatural stories ever. A woman named Kate Batts was neighbors with John Bell, who lived on the Bell Farm. They were feuding neighbors because she believed that he had cheated her out of some land in a deal, and on her deathbed she vowed to haunt the Bell family and farm forever. For the next 3 years, they experienced very strange things happening. They would hear voices speaking into their ears, see strange animals like a dog with a rabbit's head, and John's daughter would even suffer from physical attacks that would leave her unconscious. Eventually, John died, and a vial with a strange liquid was found beside his bed. The Bell Witch was held responsible for his death, marking the first time in history that a death would ever be officially recognized as being caused by the supernatural. Through their website, you can book overnight tours of the property and for some reason also book some river tubing while you're at it. Number 7. The Mackenzie House. The Mackenzie House is located in Toronto and is known for being the home of the city's first ever mayor, William Mackenzie. He moved to the home in 1859 and died only 2 years later, leaving behind his wife and a total of 14 children. The home was empty for a while until renovations began in the 1940s to turn the property into a museum. That was when people started reporting the ghost of the Mackenzie House. It was apparently reportedly a long-haired woman who even reportedly slapped a caretaker across the face. There were also many more reports of the ghost of William Mackenzie himself haunting the house, being spotted many different times over the decades. Other reports include a tall, dark figure that watches guests sleep, footsteps creaking through the hall, and the sound of piano music. The house was successfully turned into a museum and is open for anybody to visit. Number 6. LaLaurie House. The LaLaurie House was famously reimagined in American Horror Story Coven, Kathy Bates playing Madame Delphine LaLaurie. The woman was a real-life socialite turned serial killer. She had a chamber in her home where she would dispose of her victims between 1831 and 1834, but responders to a fire would eventually uncover her dark secret. Her victims apparently continue to haunt the property to this day, unable to rest because of how they died tragically. Pedestrians can apparently hear shouting, moaning, and crying coming from the home, some people even saying that they can see faces looking out into the street from the windows. Despite its history, the house has managed to maintain a place on the market, even being owned by Nicolas Cage until 2009, and it's now apparently owned by a wealthy oil tycoon. Number 5. Franklin Castle. Franklin Castle is known as one of the most haunted destinations in Ohio, having been built in 1865 for the Tiedemann family. Over the next few years, various different tragedies would take place. 4 of the family members died, and the father apparently had a hidden passage inside the home where he killed another member of his family and his mistress. Since then, those who have been inside the castle cite various different paranormal experiences and strange occurrences. In the tower window, there is apparently a woman in black who will stand there looking out at passersby. There are also reports of crying children, doors flying off hinges, and lights spinning. You can also apparently hear footsteps inside the home even if you're alone, and if you leave something on a floor or a table, it will be moved to a different spot. Human remains were also once found inside the home in the 1970s, though it was never confirmed whether or not they were real. Number 4. Joshua Ward House. The Joshua Ward House was built in Salem in 1784, Salem being known as one of the most haunted cities in the world due to the witch trials that took place there. The home was built by Joshua Ward on property that was first owned by George Corwin, the High Sheriff of Salem during the trials. He was responsible for all of the deaths that came as a result, and there were even rumors that he would lure those accused of being witches to his home and would inflict cruelty on them before their trial. Many times after a witch was found guilty, George would go to their home and steal their belongings, an action that would eventually end up with him being arrested. After he died, he was buried in the basement of the home, and as a result apparently haunts it to this day. People report the feeling of being choked, apparently by George's spirit, and there are 2 others that haunt the home: Giles Corey, a man who was found guilty as being a warlock, and another unnamed witch. Number 3. The Myrtles Plantation. The Myrtles Plantation in St. Francisville is said to be one of the creepiest places in the South, and is even called one of the most haunted houses in America. The house was built in 1797, and since then apparently dozens of deaths have occurred in a variety of different ways, including illness, poisoning, and attacks. Visitors and those who have lived in the home have reported many strange events taking place within the house. A few of the reported paranormal events include jewelry disappearing, furniture moving on its own, a grand piano playing itself, mysterious handprints, disappearing objects, and seeing former house residents standing behind you in mirrors. In the 70s, when it was purchased by the Myers family, there were numerous reports and even photos of the spirit of a young girl haunting the property. Now it stands as a bed and breakfast, popular with those chasing the paranormal, and you can receive tours late at night. Number 2. The Winchester Mystery House. This one is probably the most popular and well known on this list. The Winchester Mystery House was built in San Jose, California, and is said said to be haunted by the ghosts of everyone who was killed by a Winchester weapon. Sarah Winchester lived in the home after the death of her husband, the founder, and was tormented by the spirits of everyone who had died, so she started adding rooms to the home to make room for and confuse the restless spirits. Over time, the home became a labyrinth with many confusing features, including halls to nowhere, cut-off staircases, and sloping floors. The house now apparently has 10,000 windows, 2,000 doors, 47 fireplaces, 40 staircases, 13 bathrooms, and 9 kitchens. Sarah Winchester died in 1922, and the home is now host to tours for anyone who wishes to go in search of evidence of the many ghosts within the walls. Number 1. The Whaley House. In the year 1852, a man named James Robinson, also known as Yankee Jim, was sentenced to death for the crime of grand larceny or theft. Years later, a couple named Thomas and Anna Whaley built a house on the exact spot where Yankee Jim had passed away. As a result, the home apparently became haunted by his restless spirit. His footsteps were apparently able to be heard throughout the house. As years went on, though, more ghosts came to inhabit the property, including Mr. and Mrs. Whaley after they had passed away, along with their dog. All their ghosts have been reported as being sighted within the home. The sightings and paranormal events apparently became so overwhelming that in the 1960s, the US Commerce Department classed the house as officially haunted. It is now a museum that offers nighttime tours to those who are interested in potentially catching a glimpse of the ghosts.